If you're looking to create, grow, and sustain your wealth, download and subscribe to the Pain Points of Wealth podcast at BeBullish.com with Bob, Ryan, and Chris Payne. It's your podcast for market insights, money tips, and real talk on the economy. Download and subscribe at BeBullish.com.
At IKEA, your dreams can come true. Well, maybe not the ones where you're being chased by a monster. We're talking about kitchen dreams. And there are IKEA products and solutions for all of them. Whether it's a whole new kitchen, a statement glassware set, or just new cutlery. If you got big dreams or small dreams in any size of budget, IKEA can help you bring them to life. Visit IKEA.us/dreamkitchen to learn more. Dream the possibilities.
The Stone Zone. Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome. You're about to dive into the deep end of the Stone Zone, where we cover American politics, where you can get our incisive analysis based on 50 years in the arena. This just in, former FBI Director James Comey confirms that he will challenge the legality of Donald Trump's appointment of Lindsay Halligan as the U.S. Attorney. Now, you have to remember the background on this. Eric Siebert was appointed U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia. This is where the investigation into FBI Director Comey was situated. Siebert was the interim U.S. Attorney, but when it was learned, it was actually revealed right here in the Stone Zone, that Eric Siebert had a meaningful conflict of interest, that Siebert's father-in-law, that is to say his wife's father, was James Comey's daughter's godfather, has also represented Comey as an attorney. This is a material conflict of interest. President Trump also learned that Eric Siebert was quietly preparing a 51-page memo arguing against the prosecution of James Comey, who very clearly lied under oath before Congress, the exact same thing they charged me with. So once Siebert was exposed and fired by the president, that undoubtedly made the office vacant again. And even under a conservative reading of the law, the Attorney General's 120-day appointment power was immediately reset. That meant that Pam Bondi could appoint Lindsay Halligan as the interim U.S. Attorney. So in sum, even under a conservative interpretation of Section 546, the law in question, Siebert's appointment by the Eastern District of Virginia judges reset when Attorney General's 120-day appointment power expired, and when Siebert was then fired, the office became vacant, which allowed the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, to appoint a new interim U.S. Attorney for 120 days. That is Lindsay Halligan. So this stratagem by James Comey will not work. Halligan will not be turned out, and the indictment against him remains very serious. She also, as you know, at this point, indicted Letitia James for mortgage fraud. James has complained that mortgage fraud is rarely prosecuted. Others have argued that she's not guilty. She's very clearly guilty, as we've demonstrated here in the Stone Zone when we had Sam Antar from whitecollarfraud.com outlining the various documents, which are right there in black and white. Turns out that Letitia James herself has prosecuted New Yorkers for the exact same act of mortgage fraud that she now argues is not prosecutable. And then yesterday, shockingly, we learned that the home in Norfolk, Virginia, the home that she lied to get a mortgage for, and specifically in the mortgage document, she says the home will be occupied by herself and her niece, is occupied by her niece, Nikita Thompson, who turns out to be a fugitive from justice, who's wanted on multiple criminal warrants in the state of North Carolina. So the head law enforcement officer for the state of New York is actually harboring a fugitive in a property that she owns in Norfolk, Virginia. You cannot make this stuff up. Meanwhile, Barack Hussein Obama has reappeared for the final appearance on the left-wing comedian Mark Maron's podcast, he had another other than the former president, Barack Obama, the former White House resident who's contributed more to racial division than perhaps anyone in the history of our country. Obama went on a tone-deaf bromide about the need for decency and civility in politics, and how Americans are too caught up on materialism. Let's listen to the former president.
The point is that we have blown through, just in the last 6 months, a whole range of not simply assumptions, but rules and laws and practices that were put in place to ensure that nobody's above the law, and that we don't use the federal government to simply reward our friends and punish our enemies. And the same thing's obviously happening in the Justice Department. So people are right to be concerned. The interesting thing, and what I've been trying to do when I've been speaking about this publicly is just to remind folks, just as was true during the McCarthy era and has been true throughout our history, what's required in these situations is a few folks standing up and giving courage to other folks, and then more people stand up and kind of go like, yeah, no, that's not who we are. That's not our idea of America. We don't want masked, folks with rifles and machine guns patrolling our streets.
This actually blows my mind for a couple things. First of all, this guy must really think we are stupid. Under the 8 years of Barack Obama and the second 4 years he got to be president when Joe Biden was the technical president, but we all think we know that Barack Obama was pulling the strings. They engaged in the greatest weaponization of the criminal justice system to go after Donald Trump and his supporters in American history. They engaged in something that was no less than the greatest single dirty trick in American political history, in which they used the full authority of the United States government and the incredible capabilities of our intelligence agencies to basically frame Donald Trump for Russian interference and assistance to his election. That was fraudulent. There was never any basis for that. They utilized two pieces of fabricated evidence, the famous Steele dossier. That was actually paid for by Hillary Clinton, and she paid a fine, actually, to the Federal Election Commission for hiding that payment, masking it as legal fees. And then the false claim that the Democrat National Committee had been the target of an online hack by Russian intelligence. There was no truth to that either. But they used both of those canards as the rationale to spy on Donald Trump's campaign. They got FISA warrants in order to do so under false pretenses. They then continued to weaponize that by the setup of the Mueller witch hunt. It was really amazing. I watched an interview with Jack Smith, the now discredited former special counsel, and Andrew Weissman, perhaps the most corrupt prosecutor in U.S. history, talking extensively about how neither one of their probes was politically motivated. I mean, Jack Smith actually made questioning the outcome of an election, which every American has a First Amendment right to do, a crime. He actually spied on 8 individual Republican U.S. senators in this twisted manhunt. He also convinced a judge in D.C. to order one of Donald Trump's own lawyers to testify against him and to turn over all of his work documents. That lawyer's name was Evan Corcoran. That is a blatant violation of the Sixth Amendment, would never have held up in court. The Judge Beryl Howell of D.C. ordered this on her way to retirement. So the people who ran the greatest weaponized criminal justice system in history to go after their political enemies, are now whining because they're being held accountable for their own crimes. Obama is preaching to us about materialism. Barack Obama, who increased his net worth exponentially as president. He has a massive mansion in Martha's Vineyard. He's obviously not too worried about climate change. He has a beach house. This is the same venue where his personal chef mysteriously died, drowning in a few inches of water. None of that has been explained. Notice how quickly that dropped out of the news. So he has his mansions. He has millions of dollars. He's flown around throughout the world, wined and dined and worshipped like a golden calf. But he has an audacity to lecture the American people about being too materialistic. These people are struggling to put food on their plates every day due to the economic policies enacted by Obama and then by Biden. These are the exact problems that President Trump is working at breakneck speed to reverse. So in terms of civility, Obama notoriously attacked white Americans, saying that we were bitter clingers because we believed in Christ and the Bible and we support the Second Amendment. This devious Marxist often used surrogates to espouse rhetoric fueling his divisive agenda so he could carry on his polite facade while breaking up and destroying the country to effectuate the dreams of his alcoholic, deadbeat, Kenyan griftist Marxist of a father. What pains Obama now is his growing irrelevance, appearing on a podcast that is being shuttered essentially due to lack of interest, as President Trump rises as the seminal figure of what was once believed to be Obama's era. Then you look at the new podcast by his wife, Michelle Obama, which, based on the number of people downloaded, appears to me to be a gigantic flopperoo. Now Obama has criminal investigations to look forward to over his role in fomenting the Russiagate conspiracy. Truly, nobody deserves a more embarrassing perp walk or to be fitted in an orange jumpsuit more than the usurper, Barack Obama himself. You're listening to Roger Stone, and this is the Stone Zone if you're just tuning in. A new study from the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expressions shows that the percentage of young people identifying as transgender is decreasing rapidly as this fad appears to be wearing off. In the survey of over 50,000 undergraduate students, the findings showed that only about 3.6% of young adults considered themselves non-binary or transgender. That's a decline from 5.2% of the vote just a few years ago. It is also interesting that it's a 6.8% drop just from last year. This is really quite extraordinary. The report author, Eric Kaufman, said the fall of trans and queer seems to similar to the fadings of fashion or trend. It happened largely independently of shifts in political beliefs and social media use, although there seems to be improved mental health playing a role here. As Generation Z increasingly adopts conservative ideals, more traditional ideals, they're apparently growing out of adopting transgenderism as there is no more social clout that comes along with this depraved lifestyle choice. However, thousands of children have already been drugged with puberty blockers and had their genitals mutilated in service to this weird transgender cult. So many lives have been destroyed needlessly. It is truly tragic. The groomers responsible for this should be brought to justice so nothing like it can ever happen again. Why the leadership of the Democrat Party seems to be held captive by 0.8% of the public that considers itself transgendered, well, that's a political question I just can't answer. I'm Roger Stone. You're listening to Stone Zone. Don't go away, because we'll be right back.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
I really appreciate those kind words from Vice President J.D. Vance. Well, ABC's late-night host Jimmy Kimmel's ratings have returned to the toilet after he squandered a post-suspension bounce that temporarily rejuvenated interest in the show, which is really actually flailing Last Wednesday, the Nielsen rating showed that Kimmel received only about 1.7 million viewers, down from an already dismal 1.77. He averaged throughout the second quarter 2025. In comparison, Fox News' late-night alternative, Gutfeld, averaged about 3.2 million viewers throughout the same period, making Gutfeld the new king of late-night television. And he gets those numbers on cable TV while being broadcast into far, far fewer homes than Kimmel, who was broadcast both on cable and on broadcast TV, which shows you what a great triumph that is for Gutfeld. Recently, Stephen Colbert was canceled by CBS as his show was reportedly losing $50 million per year, while he was being viewed by a mere 2.4 million people per night. So, in other words, Colbert, who got canceled, was getting over twice the number of people that Kimmel is getting today. So it begs the question, how much is ABC losing on Kimmel with even more woeful ratings than Colbert? The answer has to be in the tens of millions, actually. ABC was very stupid for not using the controversy over Kimmel's reprehensible comments about my friend Charlie Kirk being murdered to take him off the airways permanently. You see, Disney caved in to left-wing pressure and boycotts that would have faded, frankly, within a week. Now they will lose far more money being stuck with Kimmel for the near future, as canceling him again will just reignite all the vitriol from the American left, who will claim that Kimmel is being censored when he gets the inevitable axe. Disney just can't let it sink in. When you go woke, you surely go broke. Russ Vought predicted that there will be over 10,000 federal jobs will be ended on a permanent basis during the current government shutdown. Russ Vought, the director of the Office of Management and Budget, very good friend of mine, said we want to be very aggressive where we can be in shuttering the bureaucracy, not just the funding. We now have an opportunity to do that, and that's where we're going to be looking for our opportunities. So how about that? Republicans who always talk about smaller, more efficient government and talk about cutting spending will actually do so by the greatest president of my lifetime, President Donald Trump. This shutdown is the Schumer shutdown, folks. Chuck Schumer, the Democrats, demanding over $1 billion in new spending to keep the government running, while the Republicans are united to keep the government running at the current funding levels. And that's before we begin the cutting. I'm Roger Stone. You're listening to the Stone Zone here on the Red Apple Audio Networks. If you love politics, you're in the right place. Don't touch that dial because, folks, we'll be right back.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
No, I don't know about you, but I love a good steak or a very high-quality hamburger. But very, very soon, they could actually be hard to find and extremely expensive even if you can find one. That's right here in America, the land of plenty. Beef may soon become nearly inaccessible. In fall of 2025, Americans face a beef shortage not seen since before 1951, when cattle numbers reached 82.8 million head compared to just 28.2 million head this year. This decline has driven prices skyward, turning what was once a dietary staple into a luxury. So ground beef, for example, was once about $3.50 per pound, now exceeds $6 in many areas, with steaks and roasts posting double-digit price increases, according to the latest U.S. Department of Agriculture data. I've really been looking at this because, well, I love a good steak. I like it Pittsburgh style, kind of charred on the outside, but virtually raw or rare on the inside. It's hard to get exactly right, but a combination of restrictive environmental regulations, escalating production costs, elevated livestock feed prices, and a New World screwworm outbreak in Mexico, where flesh-eating larvae threaten livestock, has actually badly disrupted our current U.S. beef supply chains. Consumers are turning to cheaper cuts, raising concerns about how America's beef industry reached this crisis and what steps can be done to restore affordability as well as abundance. The roots of the beef shortage trace back to a series of bad policy decisions, economic pressures, and global events. See, back in 2015, the Clean Water Rule, passed under Barack Obama and later expanded under Joe Biden, tightened regulation on the waters of the United States, restricting access to grazing lands for ranchers. Climate-smart initiatives from the Inflation Reduction Act, which of course did nothing to reduce inflation. You ever notice how they name these bills to be the exact opposite of what they actually do? This imposed these costly compliance measures, such as methane reduction programs on an already strained beef industry here in the United States. So these regulations of prioritizing environmental goals over food security essentially handcuffed ranchers, forcing some to sell off cattle rather than navigate the new financial burden of these strict regulations. Concurrently, the Biden-Harris administration rolled out targeted financial programs, including up to $4 billion in loan forgiveness for socially disadvantaged farmers. Those are farmers who were Black, Hispanic, Native American, Asian, or Pacific Islanders through the 2021 America Rescue Plan Act, which of course did nothing to rescue America. Under Section 1005 of the America Rescue Plan of 2021, the U.S. Department of Agriculture was authorized to provide up to 120% forgiveness on eligible outstanding loan balances. That's our tax money, by the way. So aimed at addressing historical U.S. Department of Agriculture discrimination, the program faced legal challenges, was partially blocked for violating equal protection principles. But while these efforts sought to promote equity and drought resilience, what they really did was to put even greater pressure on our domestic beef production. Domestic and global economic factors have added to the crisis. Feed prices for soybeans and corn have risen by 20 to 25% since 2021. Due to global supply chain disruptions, this has exacerbated costs for U.S. ranchers. Disruptions and the war in Ukraine, of course, starting in 2022, spiked costs an additional 30%. At the same time, fuel and labor costs were amplified by inflation, reaching a high of 8% in 2022. These have also strained our agricultural operations. Now, add on top of all that, high interest rates on loans have limited reinvestment in the herds. All the while, labor shortages and pandemic area spending have reduced farm productivity, increased operational costs. This has threatened the sustainability of small and mid-sized farms and ranches. This resulted in a plummeting U.S. cattle inventory down to 28.2 million head in 2025, with a 10% drop just from 2019 alone. So beef production is projected to fall, let me look to see, $26.4 billion pounds in 2021. That's a 2% decline from last year, while overall food prices have risen over 3.4% this year, cooling from an 11% peak in 2022. The beef industry, of course, isn't alone in its struggles. Many other commodities have seen similar upheaval, from coffee prices, which are up 54% due to Brazilian droughts. Chocolate has risen 20% in cost due to West African crop failures, and egg prices have fluctuated wildly due to the avian flu. The real issue persists as a unique case driven by America's high consumption of 57 pounds per person last year, surpassed only by chicken. You're going to need to watch this issue, folks, because the beef supply is very definitely, I think, in danger. We'll see how the U.S. Department of Agriculture deals with this, but more beef. That's the answer. Meanwhile, Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping believes that the United States will blink first in a prolonged trade war with China, according to Chinese insiders who spoke to the Wall Street Journal this week. China believes if they can precipitate a meltdown in the U.S. markets, that they can get President Trump to lose his resolve. This week, China sanctioned U.S. units of Hanwha Osha, a South Korean shipping company. Last week, they restricted the export of rare earth elements, which resulted in President Trump threatening a 100% tariff on China unless the Chinese communists backed off. The Chinese economy itself is heading dire straits. Their housing market is collapsing. Debts are skyrocketing, and consumer confidence is in the toilet in China. Xi may not care about this, but ultimately enough public anger will force the Communist Politburo to respond. Ultimately, the market economy in the U.S., while not a full free market by any stretch of the imagination, is far more dynamic than the planned economy of China that was bolstered by a corrupt U.S. political class and allowed them to parasitically feed off the economic might for decades without mounting any resistance. Those days have come to a screeching end. China has to stand on their own 2 feet, and they believe they can stare down Donald Trump. They have another thing coming because he is an Iron Man. He will not blink in this fight, and the Chinese, it would be wise to realize that and to work out reasonable terms for trade. Meanwhile, the New York Times has done a glowing profile on domestic terrorists who are targeting ICE enforcement agents. The New York Times, once a great newspaper, today essentially a propaganda front for the radical left, released a revolting profile painting domestic terrorists and their sympathizers in Chicago as heroes for impeding immigration enforcement by ICE officers. They interviewed community organizers who are attempting to prevent ICE from enforcing the law, such as City Council member Andre Vasquez, who serves as chairman of Chicago's Committee on Immigrant and Refugee Rights. Vasquez told the New York Times, Chicago's been doing just fine, and then these guys showed up. There's a big concern about what these unidentified masked men are doing in the city without accountability. Chicagoans are just trying to live their life. We're not going to tolerate unconstitutional authoritarianism. Well, the removal of dangerous illegal criminals who are in the country illegally is not unconstitutional. The American people voted for it, therefore it's also not authoritarian. Outside of this one man's fantasy world, Chicago has not been doing just fine. There are more horrific murders every week. There are violent crime rates on par with the poorest third-rate nations throughout the world. There is a criminal justice system that does not report those crimes or gives a slap on the wrist to violent criminals who come through the system. Innocent people are forced to live in fear in Chicago, and they're regularly victimized while Democrat city officials like Mayor Brandon Johnson cheer it on with militant rhetoric about starting a civil war. The New York Times, its owners and its reporters should be charged as accessories to left-wing domestic terrorism for producing their own propaganda. Meanwhile, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security has announced that they've received, quote, credible intelligence, close quote, that Mexican drug cartels are placing bounties on the heads of U.S. law enforcement officers and officials. The Department of Homeland Security said in a statement, these criminal networks have issued explicit instructions to U.S.-based sympathetics, including street gangs in Chicago, to monitor, harass, and assassinate federal agents. They believe that the bounties are set for up to $50,000 for high-profile targets, including border czar Tom Homan himself. Homan recently stated that the death threats against him have increased exponentially, aided and egged on by Democrat rhetoric that increasingly encourages such violence. My friend Homan said, I make sacrifices every day. I got more death threats than anybody. I have a security team around me, but guess what? My kids don't. My wife doesn't. I mean, I haven't lived with my wife in months because I don't want her to be here right now with all of the threats. Imagine that. A man who is doing his duty to his country cannot live with his family for fear that they might be threatened and harmed. It's really quite extraordinary. The Trump administration is making immense sacrifices to save the country right now. And there are foreign and domestic enemies who are doing everything in their power to stop them. They will not hesitate to commit murders to stop immigration enforcement. That's becoming clear. They want desperately to stop the Trump administration's investigation into left-wing domestic terror networks in particular. This is where Vice President J.D. Vance, at the direction of the president, is working closely with Stephen Miller and the head of the FBI, Kash Patel, to cut off U.S. taxpayer dollars that are flowing to actual terrorist groups. They call them NGOs, that are advocating mayhem and arranging for violence and, yes, death. The cartels and the Democrats work hand in hand with these non-profit organizations, many of them funded by George Soros, on their efforts to destroy this country. Still, hundreds of thousands of Americans are applying to join and go to work for ICE and get on the front lines in the battle to save this country. To me, this is inspirational. There is a patriotic revival that's going on in this country, and you can see it every day. Except for the days of the founding era revolutionaries, this is the most consequential time to be in America, and we must do everything on our part to make sure our country is renewed and the MAGA agenda is successful. We owe it to our children and our grandchildren to stand up and fight right now. I really feel personally that my life was spared for a greater purpose. They very definitely intended for me to die in some federal prison in Georgia, where I was told by prison officials there were no cases of COVID, where I was sentenced to go for 6 to 9 months at age 68 with a lifelong history of asthma. It is only through my faith and my redemption in the cross and my belief that God would spare me and protect me from my persecutors that I'm with you today. So I really believe, like Donald Trump's life was saved in Butler, I believe my life was saved for some greater purpose. But here's the thing. God doesn't tell you his plan all at once. He tells you his plan when he's ready for you to know it. The famous Christian evangelist Kim Clement said that the nation would be saved and the giant would be taken down by a simple stone. Remember that name, he said. Now, I don't claim to be a saint, that's for sure, or to be anything other than a soldier in the army of God. But when it comes to doing my part to save this country, count me in. You're listening to the Stone Zone. I'm Roger Stone. Don't touch that dial, because we'll be right back.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back to the Stone Zone. I appreciate those kind words from Vice President J.D. Vance. Well, yesterday, the UK Daily Mail reported that the North Carolina Department of Adult Corrections is actively searching for Nakia Monique Thompson, who is the fugitive niece of New York Attorney General Letitia James. It is actually true that this story was originally reported by Joel Gilbert for the Gateway Pundit well over a month ago. Thompson, who is living in the home in Norfolk, Virginia, that Letitia James lied in order to secure a mortgage for, is wanted on multiple criminal charges. It is amazing, therefore, to me that the leading law enforcement officer for the state of New York is harboring a criminal. The actual convictions are for contributing to the delinquency of a minor, abuse of a child, possession of burglary tools, third-degree larceny, assault and battery, trespassing, shoplifting, resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, and possession of marijuana, driving with a suspended license, and even malicious conduct while she was incarcerated. So this woman's persistent criminal activity underscores the seriousness of James' role in providing Thompson with a hideout, which is what she actually did when she's on the run from North Carolina authorities. How close are Attorney General Letitia James and her niece, Nakia Monique Thompson? Well, on Thompson's LinkedIn page, she writes that she's been working with Ms. James for years, from council member to public advocate to attorney general. She even listed her employment with the elect Letitia James for Attorney General campaign during the 2018 campaign, and worked with the Brooklyn Board of Elections between 2013 and 2016. So it begs the question, what payroll is Nakia Monique Thompson on now as she holed out in the Norfolk home that Letitia James very definitely lied in order to get a mortgage for? This was not some fill-in-the-blank where they checked the wrong box. This was a drafted document that the Attorney General signed in 12 different places, all witnessed by another lawyer in the New York Attorney General's office. And she specifically said, in order to secure the mortgage, that she and her niece would inhabit this location. And of course, if this was her principal residence, which she claimed in that document, she would be ineligible to be the Attorney General for the state of New York. Now, of course, she and her lawyers try to say it's all a typographical error, just a simple clerical mistake. No, it's actually a 43-year crime spree. In securing her first mortgage, she claimed that her father was her husband in order to use his balance sheet to secure the mortgage. She would ultimately have an additional mortgage on this Norfolk property we're talking about that isn't even reflected in her state disclosure form. So she has between $250,000 and $400,000 worth of mortgages on a property that appraises for between $100,000 and $150,000. How is that possible? Not in any current lending scenario would such a thing be approvable unless, of course, you lied and you concealed one of those mortgages. Letitia James is busted. Her prosecution is going to go forward. I'm going to go out on a limb here and predict that she's going to be convicted. I say that only based on the fact that I've reviewed all of the evidence, which you can do yourself by going to whitecollarfraud.com. But the idea that this is weaponization and that Letitia James has done nothing wrong, this is a far, far more serious crime than the one she prosecuted Donald Trump for. Remember, she claimed that he inflated the value of his assets in order to secure real estate loans that he paid back in full and on time, getting $40 million in interest from his lenders, none of whom were allowed to testify at his trial, because had they testified, they would have all said they would lend him the money again tomorrow.
Thanks for listening to The Stone Zone with Roger Stone. You can hear The Stone Zone with Roger Stone weeknights at 8 on 77 WABC. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode, so you never have to wonder,
what the heck is going on here?
If you're looking to create, grow, and sustain your wealth, download and subscribe to the Pain Points of Wealth podcast at BeBullish.com with Bob, Ryan, and Chris Payne. It's your podcast for market insights, money tips, and real talk on the economy.
Download and subscribe
at BeBullish.com.